retired UGA computer science faculty member, and he's going to talk about disruptive technology coming to our world. So, without further ado, Dr. Everett, the floor is yours.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I am honored to be here. Let me see if I can share my screen here.
Okay.
Yeah, you can see that. Yeah.
Not yet. We don't see.
Not yet.
Okay. How about that? Can you see the title slide there? Disruptive technologies coming to you.
No.
Are you seeing my title slide?
No.
Nope. Okay. Let's see what we can do here.
Let's see.
Okay.
I don't have to do anything, do I, Tony?
Shouldn't have
No,
to.
I made Dr. Everett a co-host.
Okay, well, good.
Yeah, okay. And let's see if I can't share that. How's that? Can you see that?
Okay. Something is
Okay.
coming up. Something
Yes.
is
That
coming up.
disruptive technologies.
No, it has Dan Everett has started screen sharing. There it is.
All
I
right.
There
see
it
your slideshow, so
Okay, we
just
see it
need
now.
to
I'm
put it in
sharing.
slideshow mode.
Kind of reload there.
Yeah,
Can you
so
see that?
Yes.
yes.
You should be seeing like just a big picture, disruptive technologies coming to you.
That's it.
Can everybody see that? All
Yes.
right.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you so much. You know, I am really honored to be here with the Georgia Association of Educators. So I quit my teaching job at UGA because I wanted to spend more time on my climate activism. And so I was reading a bunch of material, and when I ran into this material that I'm going to present today, it just totally blew my mind. So if there's anything to this stuff that we're going to talk about today, it could revolutionize not only how we deal with climate, but how we live our whole lives. So let me start by introducing the key players. So first, the idea of disruption, disruptive technology or innovation. So disruptive technology or innovation is a business term, not a social term, coined by academic Clayton Christensen in 1995. A disruptive technology is so much better or cheaper than the existing incumbent system that it overturns the business model of a whole industry. So if you had a successful business making the old-fashioned penny farthing bicycles, shown in the left-hand picture, when the modern safety bicycle was introduced in the late 1880s, then you would have had to either radically change your operations or your successful business would be toast. You may have heard the saying of Joseph Schumpeter that capitalism is the process of creative destruction. Well, disruptive innovation is a big example of that. But the important point is that the social changes involved with this disruption are not necessarily harmful. In fact, usually the social changes are positive. So for nowadays, a lot more people are able to ride bikes than when we had to clonk around those old penny farthing bikes in the good old days. So most of the talk that I'm going to give today comes from the work of Rethink X. This is a small think tank with really big ideas. They are arguing that the technologies being developed today are having an impact not just as much as the Industrial Revolution, but more like the Agricultural Revolution. And like those two revolutions, this one is taking us to a new set of social relationships. So their key insight is what they call the Seba disruption model, which is a description of the process by which technological change can happen much quicker than anyone predicts. And so far, I haven't found anybody else that has made a systematic model of how technological change occurs. And in a little while, I'm going to tell you why the ideas of this unknown small think tank might actually be worth paying attention to. So let's go to the outline of what we're going to talk about. Okay, the first talk of this first part of this talk is encouraging. It's a story of how technology change may help us deal with the climate crisis more easily and quickly than we may think. So these three sections of the economy, energy, transportation, and agriculture, together account for about 75% of total global carbon emissions. So if all of these sectors are disrupted by zero carbon sources, it not only makes the green transition happen quicker, but also a lot cheaper. And best of all, this is all market driven. So we don't need a lot of heavy lifting by the government, which is a good thing considering the government we've got right now. Now, some folks tell me that technology can't solve the climate crisis. We need a moral revolution, or maybe we need to overthrow capitalism. Well, with all due respect, technology can solve the climate crisis. In fact, technology is the only way to deal with the climate crisis in the time we have available. We simply don't have time to restructure the whole economy and then solve the climate problem. But the second part of this talk is about android robots, and I find this quite scary. Robots have the potential to disrupt not just an industry, but the entire economy. You may remember about 10 years ago, there was a film called Humans Need Not Apply about how robots were taking all of our jobs. And it turned out so far this hasn't happened, that robots have indeed taken a lot of jobs, but people have created new jobs. The question is, what happens if robots get so capable that they can take those jobs too? So let's start with the optimistic part. Here is the Tony Seba disruption model. Okay. On the left-hand side, you see the existing system, the new system, and I'm sorry, on the right, you'd see the old system. And this is a model that's used for the SWB system, which stands for solar, wind, and batteries. So this version of the model represents a transition from a fossil fuel-based energy system to a 100% renewable energy system. Now, in terms of climate, that's kind of overkill, because in the real world, about 20% of our power comes from nuclear energy. And nuclear energy is a carbon-free source, and it provides reliable baseload power. It runs even when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow. So it makes a lot fewer batteries needed to have the 20% of the energy from nuclear power. But what the Rethink X folks are saying is that solar, wind, and battery will eventually displace nuclear as well as the fossil fuel systems. My own thought is that when fusion energy becomes cheap enough, it will replace solar, wind, and batteries so that we can recover all the land that's being used for solar farms. But that might be a long way off. So what is the Seba disruption model? It's based on a collection of positive feedback loops. Positive feedback doesn't mean it has a desirable outcome. It's just that there's a self-stoking cycle, self-reinforcing cycle. And when these loops are harmful, we call them vicious cycles or a death spiral. When the loops are helpful, we call them virtuous cycles. On the left is the new technology. As the cost of a new technology drops, more people buy it, which increases investment, which creates economies of scale and drops the price further. Meanwhile, public acceptance goes up, so more people buy it. And the new technology gets more government support and more investment and lower prices. That's the virtuous cycle. Now, on the right hand is the incumbent technology, in this case, the fossil fuel energy system. And all the same feedback loops are in operation, but this time they drive everything down. So you've got the vicious cycle or death spiral. Right? As people begin switching to the new technology, fewer people buy the incumbent technology, which decreases investment, which drives the price up, and so forth, which reduces social acceptance. That's the death spiral that's currently afflicting the coal industry and will soon hit the oil and gas industries. So we climate activists are pulling our hair out over the Trump administration cutting off funds for renewable energy and wanting to drill for oil in national parks. But according to the Seba model, we don't need to worry about this because this is just a vain attempt to prop up a dying system. I've tried to draw an arrow on this picture where we are now, right? Currently, about 30% of global electricity is generated by renewables, which should put us on the steeply accelerating part of the Seba curve. Right? And in fact, in America, about 92% of the investment in new energy last year was for renewables. Globally, it's about 2/3. So we're well into a green energy transition that's market-driven, irreversible, and happening faster than anybody imagined. So is this model correct? Probably not. In the words of the immortal Yogi Berra, it's hard to predict, especially the future. Computer modelers have a saying, no model is correct, but some models are more useful than others. In a couple of slides, I'll show evidence that the Tony Seba model might be useful. So folks, am I doing okay in terms of pace and talk? You can hear me and I'm not talking too fast?
You're doing great.
Okay, awesome. That's what I want to hear. Awesome. Okay, here we go. Disruption happens more quickly than anybody would ever imagine. So on the left, you see New York City in 1900. All right, you can see the little red circle is one car amidst a sea of horse-drawn carriages. Right? In the right, you see New York City in 1913. The red circle has one horse in a sea of cars. All right, so this is a total transformation. And how long did it take? About 13 years. The first automobile, and this didn't happen at the very start of the automobile. The very first automobiles that were introduced in the late 1800s were expensive toys. For automobiles to disrupt the horse, there were several pieces of the puzzle that had to be added. Engines grew more powerful, so a car could actually be faster than a horse. Pneumatic tires made the ride more comfortable, and mass production made the car affordable. Henry Ford priced his Model T Ford low enough so that his workers could afford to buy one. The disruption of transportation didn't take place everywhere at once. New Yorkers were early adopters, but rural areas had to wait for better roads and gasoline stations. That means the widespread shift from horses to automobiles was essentially complete by 2030, but that's still a pretty short amount of time. So as with the automobile, the multiple new technologies are converging to disrupt the energy industry. So this chart shows the plummeting prices of the three key technologies: solar, wind, and batteries. Right? Now, these charts are what's called logarithmic scales, so that they're dropping really fast. What looks like a straight line on all these charts is actually a steeply plunging exponential reduction curve. Things are going down really, really fast. So we see that in the period from 2010 to 2030, they're anticipating that they're predicting that the price of solar panels will continue decreasing as fast as it's been decreasing. And that means they'll be 20 times cheaper in 2030 than they were in 2010. And windmills will be 3 times cheaper than in 2030 than they were in 2010. And batteries will be 45 times cheaper. And since the plunging price of solar panels is even more than the reduced price of wind farms, the Rethink X people are anticipating that the future energy mix will be mostly solar, not very much wind. Now, I'm going to show you why I'm paying so much attention to these extreme predictions from this unknown little think tank. Ta-da! This is the most encouraging picture I have ever seen. Here it is. It's a chart of solar power installations from 2000 to 2030. The black curve shows the actual installations to date. It's basically a rising exponential, which is exactly what you'd expect from a positive feedback loop. But the orange lines are the 5-year predictions from the International Energy Agency. You can see that first they made a prediction that was way off, far short of the actual rate of installations. So then later they made another straight line prediction that's a little more aggressive, but it still falls far short. And then they make another prediction that's a little more aggressive, but it still falls way short of what's actually happening. So what's going on, right? Then if you take a look at the graph of coal production, it's kind of the reverse of this, just a plunging graph, and the IEA thinks that coal production is going to go in kind of a straight line fashion. So what's going on? these folks at the International Energy Agency are the authoritative experts. So how come they keep getting it so far wrong over and over again? According to Rethink X, it's because they're experts in the old system. They haven't figured out that the old system is being disrupted. And I'm reminded of the Bob Dylan line, something is happening here, but you don't know what it is. Do you, Mr. Jones? And all the commentary that we keep seeing about how the world is falling behind on decarbonizing by 2050 seems to be based on these straight line predictions. So I haven't seen anyone else specifically talk about the Seba model, but The Economist magazine, which I really find a respectable source, is running articles on how the green energy transmission is going to be much cheaper than we thought. So I'm liking the sound of that. So here's another thing that kind of pops up out of this Tony Seba disruption model. It's called super energy. It turns out that if you are trying to build a 100% renewable energy system that provides all of your electricity needs all of the time, there's a trade-off between how many extra solar panels you build and how many batteries you need. So in the picture here, you see the optimal blend, the cheapest result is kind of in the middle of this U-shaped curve. All right? And that at that level, they have several times more solar power than they actually need. So the idea is that in a time when, say, you've got the wind's not blowing and the sun hasn't been shining for a couple of weeks, right? You need a lot of batteries. You've got quite a bit of extra solar capacity that's not really generating very much, but it's generating a little. And that extra solar panel capacity on a cloudy day will help you out, and you won't need that many batteries. But the point is that what happens when the sun is shining and you have like 4 times more solar energy than you actually need? Well, you have a whole lot of energy that's just somehow appears, and it's called super energy. This energy is not there all the time, but you have to be able to have a way to use it when it is there. So for example, you can use this for EV charging. You don't have to do this all the time. In fact, Georgia Power is actually doing something like this. If you've got their time of use plans, they will sell you electricity at a time when there's excess electricity that they don't need. I can charge up my Tesla in the middle of the night for super cheap because Georgia Power has all these coal and nuclear plants that they can't shut down in the middle of the night, and people aren't really using the electricity, right? So the Rethink X folks think that there'll be industrial processes, maybe new industries that even develop. But to me, the most interesting possible application is this direct air CO2 capture. Right? Once we do reach zero carbon emissions, that doesn't mean that the Earth cools down. In fact, all the carbon we've dumped in the atmosphere over the last 200 years will keep heating the Earth up. Fortunately, some of the worst consequences of global warming, like the collapse of the West Antarctic ice sheet and flooding out every coastal city on the whole planet, these nightmare scenarios won't happen for another couple of hundred years. So it makes sense to take some of this extra energy and suck this carbon out of the atmosphere and sequester it someplace so that we can return to the climate that we used to have back before we had industrial civilization, or any climate that we choose, any climate that we want. This carbon sequestration, as they call it, can be accomplished by planting trees or by an industrial process powered by this super energy. So at this point, the weakest path towards a zero carbon electricity is the national electric grid. There's not actually a single electric grid. There's several different regional grids kind of in different parts of the country, and they're not patched together. They're not really ready for the task of, say, taking massive amounts of wind energy from Oklahoma and transporting it over to New York City, where people have a lot of hairdryers. Right? There's currently over 1,000 gigawatts, a huge amount of solar farms and battery storage that have been built, but they're not on the grid yet. They're on the wait list to be put on the grid. The permitting process is so cumbersome that it can take 10 years to build a new electric transmission system. So in my group that I'm working with called Citizens Climate Lobby, what we would really prefer are new laws that make it easier to build electric grids, but harder to build a gas pipeline. But that's not possible in the current political environment. The bills we might actually be able to pass with bipartisan support would make it easier to build new electric grids and new pipelines and new liquefied natural gas terminals. So as a bipartisan climate action group, we've made a decision to support this kind of legislation that makes it easier to build pipelines, but also easier to build electric grids. And we're getting a lot of pushback from groups that don't want to do anything that would help make it easier to build pipelines. But our strategic decision is, instead of resisting the fossil fuel production that the market wants, instead of trying to keep the market from doing what it wants, we've chosen to embrace the market, because now solar is what the market wants. Solar is cheaper than fossil fuels. So we're embracing Chancellor Bismarck's dictum that politics is the art of the possible. These laws, the Sierra Club may not like them, but they're possible. We could actually do them. And our analysis shows that this will significantly speed up the investments that have already been primed by the Inflation Reduction Act. Right? So we're making a kind of decision to step aside from the model that we've been using of resisting stuff and go to a new model of embracing stuff that's going to be built that's better than the existing one. And that's really a massive change that we're still trying to figure out how to deal with. Here's another different disruptive technology, is transportation as a service. Right? So this is the idea that instead of owning a car, you'll just take Uber or Lyft rides, and you can rent a car if you want to drive out of town. And we can already do this, but this service could be made a lot cheaper if you didn't have to pay for a driver. And in fact, this service is actually scheduled to appear in Atlanta this summer. There's an Uber Waymo service that you can get an Uber with a self-driving EV, no driver, right? In fact, if you wanted to be an early user of this service, there's a place on your Uber app where you can actually sign up and be one of the first people to ride in a car without any driver. So I don't live in Atlanta, but if I did, I would actually want to try to do this, because I like promoting the better new technologies. So anybody's bold, you can get up your Uber app and start to figure out how to get on this. So here's some of the cost advantages that would come from autonomous EV ride hailing, right? So first of all, you would have higher vehicle utilization. The average privately owned car is parked 95% of the time. So if you just have a smaller number of cars that are being used almost all the time, it's much more efficient. You use electric cars because they have much lower maintenance and insurance costs, and you save the cost of having a driver. So the Rethink X people estimate that you could save $5,000 a year from not owning a car. And that'll happen, won't happen all at once. It won't be that many people at first who just don't have a car anymore. Everybody will have a car, and then they'll also take an Uber. But over time, as the Uber becomes more and more reliable, then more and more people will choose to go without a car. Right? So,
Excuse me, Dr. Everett. Dr. Everett, there's a hand raised. Would you like to take the question now or hold until the end?
Well, I think, why don't I take the question now?
Okay, Linda?
Yes, it's not a question, but it's a comment. This past fall, I had a trip to Plains, Georgia, to see Jimmy Carter's birthplace. And that was the first time I saw panel fill. I'm looking for cotton, but what I'm looking at were these panel fields, and the closer we got to them, I understood that that's replacing where cotton used to be, and that was amazing. The other thing, I just left San Francisco, and I'm driving next to a driverless vehicle. They are all over. They are all over the place for me. I saw 3 or 4, And people in the car with me were saying, ain't no way in the world I take an Uber with no driver. And me, I'm saying, let me get in that car with no driver. But
Oh, good for you. Good for you.
It's amazing. But yeah, the world is moving right along,
Yep,
I
yep, yep.
guess. But that was it.
Yep.
But this is what I wanted to know about the paneling and new homes that are being built. Um, the I wouldn't want your suggestion, but are people, is it wise now to go on and give it a try? Or shall we wait on still kinks to get out of it? Or
Oh,
where
I'm
do you
sorry.
see the future?
I'm sorry, ma'am. What is it good to give what a try?
The paneling, the new solar paneling on
Oh, the
homes.
solar. Oh, yeah, the solar shingles. Yeah, I was looking at this. It seemed like they're kind of expensive compared to regular solar panels. But I've got solar. I've got solar panels in my house. I just love them. Right, and the solar shingles are getting cheaper. So check out kind of the price for that. But I think there's no reason that we shouldn't get them. I'm hoping to get them when I need a new roof. Right. That's the time. That's the time to get some of these solar shingles. So yeah, get your solar provider. Like whoever does your solar installations, they will be able to tell you kind of how much that costs. But definitely, those are good things, and I would definitely investigate them and go do them. So I really salute you for being such an early technology adapter. That's what it really takes to get things moving. Somebody's got to have the nerve to start it first, and you're one of those people who are doing that. So way to go.
Trust me, it won't be tomorrow. Thanks.
Won't be tomorrow. So here's a picture of the Tesla Cyber taxi that they're really designing this thing. They expect to deliver it by 2027. It can hold 2 passengers, no steering wheel, and it doesn't need to be plugged in. It just drives itself over a inductive charging pad, right, and charges. My own thinking about this is that in order to take off, transportation as a service needs to be both cheaper and more convenient. So if we could call up a service that would reliably get us to our destination in less time than we could drive, park, and walk to the door, right? And we could read or start work while we ride, and we could save $5,000 a year, I think a lot of us would do it. And when transportation as a service really takes hold, we can reclaim most of the land we now waste on parking spaces and parking lots. They'll all be parks when everybody's using these Ubers. So you only need 1 out of every 20 cars, and none of them needs to park. So perhaps, and I'm really looking forward to that. And cars, I think, will go faster when they're all automatically driven. They can react to each other and drive a lot quicker. They used to say down in LA, the cars drove bumper to bumper at 80 miles an hour, but that could actually happen if all the cars were like super fast, automatically steered cars. So here's an even more radical disruption. It involves agriculture. So Rethink X has no problem making sweeping claims. They have dubbed this new technology process precision fermentation and are calling it the second agricultural revolution. While traditional agriculture is based on growing specific organisms like a cow or a carrot, precision fermentation is based on making specific molecules. The idea is this: you identify the molecule you want, typically a protein. Then you genetically engineer a microorganism to produce that molecule. Then you culture a big vat of that microorganism and filter out the molecule you were looking for. So Rethink X predicts that by 2030, it will be 5 times cheaper to produce a protein by precision fermentation than by animal agriculture, and 10 times cheaper by 2025. And this will totally disrupt the entire food system. They claim that by being able to design food at a molecular level, food scientists will be able to create food that is tastier, healthier, and more nutritious than animal products. And in a few years, they expect there to be 50% fewer cows being raised in America, and the beef and dairy industries will be on the verge of collapse. Actually, the first time I presented this talk, people were appalled at the idea of eating this kind of manufactured frankenfood. But it'll take a little while for this sort of thing to get social exception. But when food becomes cheaper, people are eventually going to try it out. So here's kind of a quote, I think, interesting quote. Unlike the cow, we get better at making meat every single day. So this is from the CEO of Impossible Foods Corporation, who are doing some of this technology. And it kind of shows that the progress that's being made is much faster than any improvements that can take place in the old style agricultural world where you had to breed new plants to get better food. So here's some of the technologies that are involved. Just like with energy, there are 3 technological components to precision fermentation. So we need data storage and computation to look at these molecules and figure out the molecules that you actually want, right? And gene sequencing to help engineer microorganisms to produce them. So all of these technologies are plummeting in price. And just as before, these are logarithmic scales. So if you go down 3 of these horizontal lines, like data storage went from 1970 to 1995, and 3 of those horizontal lines, that's a millionfold decrease. So all of this technology is becoming much cheaper, which makes it more possible to use precision fermentation, growing things in vats, in more and more different places. So as the cost of precision fermentation falls, it becomes competitive in more and more different industries. So the first targets were molecules made in very small quantities, such as medicine. So here you've seen a bottle of insulin used to treat diabetes. So traditional insulin is made from the pancreases of cows and pigs. You had to sacrifice 50,000 animals to make 1 kilogram of insulin. So insulin by precision fermentation, being cooked up with yeast, was approved by the FDA in 1982. And by 2000, only 1% of the insulin was produced from animals. So I consider it a moral step forward to be producing insulin from microorganisms instead of slaughtering 50,000 animals per kilograms. Now, if you look at this chart, by 2020, precision fermentation starts to enter the food market. So what's that looking like? Well, here's one of the first places where precision fermentation has entered our food supply. Right? It's rennet, which is used to make cheese. Right? Rennet is traditionally extracted from the stomachs of veal calves. So by the 1970s, increasing demand for cheese, together with a rising animal rights movement, created a shortage of rennet. People don't like the idea of keeping veal calves and of slaughtering them. So rennet from precision fermentation was FDA approved in 1990, and by 2020, it was used to make more than 90% of the cheese in the United States. So this is all grown from vats instead of extracted out of animal stomachs. So this is what I consider the current star of precision fermentation. I basically try to be pretty vegan, so I always stop by every Burger King and get an Impossible Whopper. Right? So this is a veggie burger with a small amount of heme. Heme is an animal protein or animal chemical that's part of hemoglobin. Heme gives the burger a juicy, meaty taste. But instead of using animals, it's produced by fermentation of genetically engineered yeast. So this is an example of how precision fermentation is introducing itself into the food supply. Not as full items, but just ingredients in items that are made from plant materials. So here's a related technology but it's not quite the same, lab-grown beef. Right? I always like the picture that you see here. That burger, that was the first lab-grown beef burger. It was generated by taking cells from an actual cow and reproducing the cells in some kind of chemical process, right? So that burger cost $325,000 to make. I hope it was pretty good when they cooked it up. Right? But that was 2013, and by 2025, currently the production cost is about $17 a pound. So you can see a pretty startling level of reduction from $325,000 per burger to $17 a pound. And you can actually get lab-grown beef in some high-end restaurants in San Francisco, right, and Washington, D.C. It's not the same as precision fermentation, but it's kind of a related technology because precision fermentation will be used to make some of the ingredients to do this lab-grown beef. Right? So, one important social consequence of this disruption will be the collapse of essentially a lot of the animal farming industries. So there's a huge amount of land, as you see in this picture, that's used for either pasturing or growing food, corn and soybeans, to feed cows, right? So Rethink X estimates that about 60% of this land will become surplus, or about 13 times the size of Iowa, of land that's used to be used as pasture and growing soybeans and corn to feed cows, and is no longer needed. So I imagine there's going to be some social disruption in communities dependent on animal or agriculture as well. I personally come from a family of cattle ranchers in Colorado, so I wonder how this is going to affect them. But I also know that in my hometown, there's only a tiny number of people who actually make their living growing cattle. Like most people do regular things, you know, run gas stations and teach school and stuff like that. So it's not sure that there's that many people who will really be disrupted and have a hard time finding new jobs. But there could be, I just don't know. But the interesting question to me is, what do we do with all this new land, with all this land that's no longer used? Do we make it into parks? Do we make national forests? Do we give it back to the Native Americans? Well, if we do choose some way to rewild a lot of this land, it'll play a significant role in carbon sequestration. If you plant trees on a lot of this land, it will suck the enormous amount of carbon back up into the atmosphere. So that would be a really good and helpful way of helping to deal with the climate crisis. Because as I said before, we've got to recover some of this carbon that we've been putting out into the atmosphere, get the Earth's climate back to a more reasonable place, or a place that we're more familiar with. Okay, so now I'm going to get to the part of the talk that is scary. I find this scary. So what if robots became so capable that they could do any job that a human can do? I'm personally retired, so I don't need to worry about my job. But by 2040, my grandkids will be needing jobs. And when I first saw this idea of android robots, my first initial reaction was, this can't be happening. This can't be happening. Well, probably is, right? And then my second thought was, we need to ban this technology. But that never works. So is this really going to happen? Let's take a look at it. Well, the development of android robots is already well underway. Here's the Tesla Optimus. Elon Musk plans to have several thousand of these in on the Tesla production lines within this year. Now Musk is kind of known for aspirational timelines. He thought he would go to Mars by 2024, but just because it might not happen this year doesn't mean it isn't going to happen. Right? There's already quite a few robots that are used in operation, but mostly these are stationary single-purpose units that sit in one place and do one specific job. So the Ford F-150 production line has robotic welders, riveters, painters, and inspectors, but none of these robots could do an educator's job. The thing about robots with human shapes, with android robots, is they can be much more flexible and move around. But the key element here is that these robots that we have right now have to be trained or built for a specific job. This robot couldn't be hauled into a classroom and made into a teacher. Right? The components of these robots, since the hardware components, sensors, actuators, computing hardware, a lot of those are being really aggressively developed by the Chinese. The Chinese have made a societal decision to really push artificial intelligence, and they really want to build humanoid robots so that they can replace their aging population in the workforce. Right? But the missing technology right now is this artificial general intelligence. That means a computer or a robot that's just as smart as a human being, or even smarter than a human being. So the real question is, in terms of the development of these things as threats, is a robot with AGI, artificial general intelligence, could learn to do any job that a human could do and do it better. So is this really going to happen? How close are we to artificial general intelligence? So the average expert prediction is that we'll receive artificial general intelligence by 2040, but there's optimists that think we are in the final stages and we will have artificial general intelligence much quicker than that. Even 2040 seems like pretty darn quick to me. So my favorite test of artificial general intelligence is the Wozniak coffee test. So Steve Wozniak was one of the co-founders of Apple Computers along with Steve Jobs. And the Wozniak coffee test is this: a robot enters a unknown house and figures out how to find all the ingredients and pieces needed to brew a cup of coffee. You have to find the coffee, they have to find the coffee maker, they have to figure out what buttons to push on the coffee maker, they have to enter the water, right? They have to actually brew a pot of coffee. And so far, there's not been a robot built that can satisfy the Wozniak coffee test. So we're not in any imminent danger of being overrun by Terminator robots. Right? But this coming? So here's another thing that shows that artificial general intelligence is actually a really hard problem. So these two people, as you see on the right-hand part, were a neuroscientist and like a physician who made a bet in 1998 that the neuroscientist would be able to understand how the brain does consciousness within 25 years. So 25 years later was 2023, and Chris Koch had to pay off the bet. They were nowhere near understanding consciousness. He had to pay off the bet, which was a case of good wine. And consciousness is not the same thing as intelligence, but we don't understand intelligence either. We don't know how the human brain does intelligence. But the thing is that these AI systems that we're now coming out with, like ChatGPT, they don't work like the human brain does. They don't understand human intelligence. They're based on pattern recognition from vast amount of things that humans do. So that shows that we could actually create artificial general intelligence without actually understanding how the mind works. Now, I find that a little scary myself. Okay. So here's some of the Rethink X insights on this robotic transition. So first of all, they're saying that the labor market disruption is inevitable. Right? If you had a robot that was working 20 hours a day, year-round, at $10 an hour, it would generate $73,000 worth of labor every year. But then if robots were put to work making more robots, the price of labor would fall to the floor. There will be no way to compete with these guys. But one interesting observation is that the new labor market will be based on tasks and not jobs. Right now, to create a job, an employer has to find enough tasks to make a human worker busy most of the time and cobble all these tasks together to make jobs. But the new market will be about tasks. So suppose we need to have the lawn mowed. Well, we could tell our household robot to mow the lawn, or we could call in an order and a robot would appear, delivered in an autonomous Uber, and do the job and go home. But another interesting prediction here is that all goods and services will become cheaper and better because of this enormous new supply of labor, which means an era of superabundance, an economic boom. They expect an economic boom. Our economy will grow and grow because we have all these workers producing stuff. Right? So the question here is how do we handle this? I like this prediction of superabundance because financial problems are easier to solve if you've got a lot of money. It's all too easy to imagine a nightmare scenario where robots take all our jobs and leave the rest of us to starve. But there's also a utopian scenario where robots do all the work except the work we humans want to do. We humans would live like hereditary aristocrats, free to write poetry or pursue science the way Charles Darwin did, or whatever we wanted to do. And how do we find a pathway to this positive or utopian future? It's going to have to be some kind of social decision that's made. And I believe that this is one of the great challenges, perhaps the great challenge for our society in the next maybe 20 years. Okay, so how do we do this? All right. Well, the first thing that we need to remember, is that capitalism needs consumers. So we may be afraid, some of us may be afraid that the capitalists are just going to take all the produce and all the profits from these new robots and leave the rest of us to starve. But if there's no consumers, nobody will buy their products. So everybody, rich and poor, has an incentive to kind of make it work that we can have all these robots, but we still have money in our pockets so we can buy stuff. Right? And Rethink X points out that the early stage will provide a grace period. All these robots won't just suddenly arrive and take all our job. There'll be a few robots that are not as capable. They're just kind of getting started. But as these first few robots show up, then people will begin to realize that, hey, we've got a real problem here and we need to do something about it. So having thought about this, the only thing that I can think of that would actually work would be a universal basic income. So instead of trying to outlaw the robots, we just put a tax on their labor production. And the proceeds from this tax go out to all citizens, but especially to any workers who lost their job because of these robots. Right? And then as the actual basic income goes up, we have more and more robots that are generating more and more wealth. We're getting more and more of this universal basic income. Then people on an individual basis can decide whether, hey, I want to continue working to make more money, or I want to quit my job and just do something that I feel like a job that I feel like is more productive to me. I want to be a teacher. I want to be a nurse. All right? Or I don't work at all and just write poetry or do chess for the rest of my life. Right? So we would need an ethic, I think, that kind of encourages everybody to be somehow useful. And I think hereditary aristocrats always had that. If you were born with a silver spoon in your mouth and you never have to work, you'll probably still be taught that you ought to do something to contribute to society. And I think we can continue still to do that. So what do you think?
Patrick, your hand is
Wow.
Patrick's hand is up.
Thank you, Tony. This is fascinating because it sounds like Star Trek.
It does, doesn't it?
Everything and science fiction and what's the movie with iRobot with?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like really, it's amazing. But what I wanted to comment was like solar panels. They are now developing them to where they actually produce energy on a cloudy day. And I think about how it could be applied to these glass buildings downtown in any city and how much energy it can create that would really knock the fossil fuel off the bases. I mean, it's like they would not exist. And then that also leads to comment on this, Trump trying to kill renewables, but with the energy, just like he's trying to bring back coal, well, the industry is not going to allow that to happen because it's cheaper to use natural gas than it is coal. So no matter what he does, it's not going to work. So I would like your comment on those comments.
Well, I think both of those are really good comments. And I think what the thing that gives me the most kind of encouragement is all of the people who are working to build solutions, like putting solar panels on these glass roofs, right? Doing what they call the circular economy, where you don't have to waste anything; everything gets recycled, right? Building new energy systems. A lot of people are working on doing this stuff. And yeah, I totally agree. The coal industry is dead. Right? It doesn't matter how much you love coal, right? It just ain't happening. And that's going to happen to the natural gas industry in a few years too, according to these predictions. And I kind of think, not that I believe everything here is true, but that one graph I showed you where the solar power is increasing way faster than the experts are predicting, that kind of shows that something's going on here. And I think that's something that's very, very good. So I definitely agree with everything you said.
Okay, Linda.
Yeah, yes, I'm interested in your group, and mainly because you said it's bipartisan. So what's the name of it, and can we join to get your maybe post or some type of platform that you're on?
It's a group's called Citizens Climate Lobby, and we definitely have chapters in Atlanta and quite a few all around the state of Georgia. So I'll kind of put that on the chat.
Thank
Citizens
you.
Climate Lobby. Yeah, when my sister told me that there was a bipartisan climate group, I said, sign me up, right? Because you just can't do this with just leftists, right? It's got to be everybody working together, because this is transformation of the whole society. Thanks for that question. Give me a chance to plug CCL.
Brenda, you have a question? Brenda Elam?
I do. Going back to the getting rid of the cows and all the animals that produce our meat now, and you were saying that the meat is going to be chemically produced. Will that meat have more chemicals in it than the meat that we eat now?
Well, yeah, that's a really good question, and this is the concern that my first audience brought up. Is like, how do you know that this stuff is nutritious? What has it got in it? It's all has to do with your kind of attitude towards technology, right? If you're like a pro technology person, we can say, well, hey, we can design a meat that's healthier than the meat that Mother Nature designed, right? But although I'm a really big technology buff, I'm not quite so sure about that, because for a long time, we didn't recognize all the different vitamins that people need to eat. But there's certainly you can design food that has any chemicals that you want. And if there's chemicals that are harmful chemicals, you definitely don't want them in the food. So there's certainly no reason why like industrially processed food couldn't be free of bad attitudes. I'm confident they can do that. I'm not so confident that they can give us all the nutrients that we need that we might not scientifically know about yet. But I do like my Impossible Burgers, right? It's mostly made out of plant, but just this little bit of a heme molecule that's generated by precision fermentation. So that's kind of a slow step towards this process. I hope we mostly eat just plants and we don't go to eating like everything from a vat of yeast. That'd be my preference.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Well, Dr. Everett, it has been really exciting, informative, and a little bit scary too. But thank you so much for the presentation.
I am so glad to be asked here, and it was really fun to be with you all, and thank you for your wonderful questions and attention. I hope you have a really great lunch and a wonderful day.
Okay, then you as well. Thank you. We have just a few announcements. Our next lunch bunch will be June 1st, and it's going to be about the aging driver, 6.5 tips to survive the drive. And let's see what else is coming up. This is Teacher Appreciation Week. Thank you so much for all our teachers and our retired teachers. May 5th through the 9th is also Asian American, Native American Heritage Month, celebrating heritage and their contributions. Are there any other questions or announcements we need to make?
July 9th, Sandra, is Dr. Buster Evans will be our lunch bunch speaker. And also July 18th is our informational meeting, our quarterly informational meeting.
Our retired.
Yes.
Correct. That's from 10 to 12 on July 18th. So mark your calendars. It has been, do we have any other announcements? Well, it's great seeing everyone. And how many of you attended the All Members Conference? We had a great time this year. Plus, we had an exciting RA. We missed some of you who weren't able to attend, but maybe next year, look forward to our All Members Conference.
Sandra,
Tony,
I want to thank everybody that did come and everybody that's on here. I am proud to serve as president, and I am glad that we have continued this. Tony and Karen and y'all have done amazing jobs with this lunch bunch, and I'm glad to be a part of it. And thank you all.
And we are still in need of a communications person, so please keep that in mind. Linda, you have your hand up?
Yes, I have an announcement. We have organized the Atlanta Association of Educators Retired Caucus. Our next meeting will be the 4th Thursday in May at Piccadilly at Greenbrier. You do not need it. This is your invitation to attend. And if you know any other retired Atlanta people, we really need them. We're going to deal with advocacy and bonding with groups like the one we met today in order to not just give us something to do, but be a part of as much as we want to because we're retired. So thank you guys. And thank you so much, Tony, and thanks to Patrick, and of course, Sandra for this lunch bunch, and Karen in her absence. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Linda. And did everyone get the information about the group, the bipartisan group, Citizens Climate Lobby? And that's all he put in the chat. So I guess we can Google it and get more information. Well, if there's no other announcements, I wish every one of you, Linda, is your hand still up?
No, I'm good.
Oh,
thanks.
Okay. I wish all of you have an enjoyable day and the rest of your week, and we will see you next month, if not before. Have a great day. Thanks for attending. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.